Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the October edition of the Southeast Monthly Climate Webinar, where we talk about the climate and special topics pertaining to the Southeast region. I am Sandra Rain, the Regional Climatologist from the Southeast Regional Climate Center, and I will be giving a climate overview. Our speakers today are Todd Hamill from the Southeast River Forecast Center, who will provide a water resources overview, and Pam Knox from the University of Georgia, who will give an agricultural impact update. Unfortunately, due to unexpected circumstances, our scheduled special topic speaker was unable to make it this morning, but will be speaking at our next webinar. So it'll be a little shorter today, but we thank everyone for joining us. Just a reminder to type your questions and comments into the question box at any time, and they will be answered at the end. Also, a recap email of this webinar with a YouTube link to this webinar and recording will be sent out later today. All right, let's talk about the climate. Temperatures have been slightly above average across the Southeast region over the past 30 days, with parts of Virginia and North Carolina seeing around 4 degrees above average. It's been warm in the Caribbean as well, with Puerto Rico having its warmest September on record. Precipitation was a little more variable, however, with a few pockets of above average precipitation, but a general area of below average precipitation in eastern Virginia, North Carolina, and South Carolina. Puerto Rico has also seen some variability, but has generally been dry as well. Okay, so we're moving through our tropical season, and it has been a busy year. We've made it through Victor on the 2021 names list, and we are past the historical peak of the season, and storms are more likely to organize closer to the United States, but that doesn't mean it's over. The official end to the season is November 30th, and there's always a chance for a tropical system at any point during the year. Going through what we've seen this season, we've gone through tropical storms Odette, Peter, and Rose. Fortunately, they did not make landfall in the United States, but they did produce rip currents and rough surf for the eastern seaboard. Then there was Hurricane Sam, a very powerful Category 4 hurricane with winds reaching 155 miles per hour. It was a long-lived major hurricane as well, which eventually became a big snowstorm for Iceland. Perhaps the most interesting aspect of Sam was a sail drone that made it into the eye of the hurricane. This was the first sail drone to ever do so for a Category 4 hurricane, and it took some impressive video of 50-foot waves and winds of over 120 miles per hour. And this was all part of a NOAA research project to improve storm forecasting. Next, we had subtropical storm Teresa, which was short-lived, and tropical storm Victor, both of which stayed well to the east of the United States. So next on our list would be Wanda. The National Hurricane Center is watching two possible areas of development, but so far both of these areas are given a low probability of development in the next 5 days or so. As far as the ENSO update goes, we are currently still under La Niña watch, with about 70 to 80% chance of La Niña developing and lasting through the winter season. But the new update comes out this Thursday, October 14th. So we'll see what has changed since then. The current drought monitor continues to show devastating drought in the western United States and not as much drought in the eastern half of the United States. But closer to home, we still have an area of abnormally dry conditions in parts of eastern North Carolina, although with the recent rainfall over the past weekend, that could change this week, and still dealing with some moderate drought in parts of Puerto Rico and the Virgin Islands. As far as the drought outlook is concerned, Puerto Rico's drought should continue to persist and possible new development is likely. However, the rest of the Southeast should remain drought-free. Over the next 3 months from October to December, The Climate Prediction Center has an increased probability of warmer than normal temperatures, with an increased probability of drier than normal precipitation, except in Virginia and North Carolina, where there should be equal chances of wetter or drier months. The 6 to 10 day outlook, or from October 16th to 20th, has a probability of warmer than normal temperatures with drier than normal precipitation, except in Florida, where there is an increased probability of above normal precipitation. But as far as the rest of this week, it looks like the best chance to see any precipitation will be on Saturday with the passage of a cold front. Otherwise, it should remain relatively dry. So just some points to highlight. It's been slightly above average across the southeast region, and pockets of above average precipitation, but mostly below average precipitation for Virginia, the Carolinas, and Puerto Rico. We've seen a lot of tropical weather this season. However, recently, none of that has hit the United States. We are still under a La Niña watch, but the new update will come out this Thursday, October 14th. We're still dealing with some abnormally dry conditions in Virginia and North Carolina, and Puerto Rico is still dealing with some moderate drought that does not look like it will decrease anytime soon. There's a probability of warmer temperatures over this next 6 to 10 days and drier conditions, except in southern Florida, and the next 3 months will likely be warm with equal chances of wetter or drier conditions in Virginia and North Carolina and drier conditions elsewhere. All right, I'll lend it on over to Todd, who will give you the water resources update.
Okay, so we'll start off with stream flows across kind of more a broad picture across the southeast, and especially with the recent rainfall, you can see that we're seeing above normal stream flows, and we have been since the middle of summer. Like I said, overall, off and on, we've been having regular rainfall through the southeast, and that's made a big difference. And I think more so the focus has been over the Mississippi, Alabama, and Georgia area, and even in Florida has stayed above. So we'll take a closer look at each of the states or the groups of states. So we'll go on ahead and go to the next slide, which will be a focused look on each of the different states. And you can see with all the rainfall we had in Alabama, this is usually a time of year. You can see we have kind of a lull in that September where we're a little lower than usual, and that's typical for this time of year. Our recharge season to recharge the soils is typically during the winter. And during this time, we're usually drier unless we have tropical weather. And we've sort of been in a tropical, under tropical moisture. And that's part of the reason we've had a lot of this, especially last week, that heavy rainfall. And it has kept things wet over most of Alabama. We have a similar thing in Georgia, where we've seen a great deal of rain over Georgia. Now that has been a little bit more recent as we've gone through August and September. So our stream flows have responded to all that rainfall in being above normal for this time of year. And then when we look at Florida, they as we got into early summer, there was a concern that they weren't getting enough rain, that Lake Okeechobee wouldn't fill up, all of those things. But fortunately, they did see their rain in the June-July timeframe and have stayed relatively wet during that time. And this is, as opposed to the rest of the Southeast, this is their wet season. So they expect to see more rainfall during this time of year, and they've had just enough to keep them in that normal range. So they could actually use probably a little bit more rainfall before they go to their dry season. So we'll have to watch that very closely and to see if they start to fall off as they get into dry season. But overall, they're in pretty decent shape. So now let's look at the ones along the Atlantic coast. And you can see South Carolina has, it kind of peaked during the winter last year and then has fallen back into more of a normal category. And it's a little different across the state. Up in the upland part of the state near the mountains has been a little more wet. And as we get a little closer to the coast, it's been a little bit drier. So they kind of balance out as you look at through from a whole state perspective. A similar thing has happened in North Carolina, where we've had more rain in closer to the mountains and in the western part of the state, as opposed to the eastern part of the state, where we've been just a touch drier. And again, that's reflected their
I'm
stream
on a
flows
webinar. I can't have
across
you
the
in here.
state. And so then we get to Virginia, and Virginia has been a mixed bag also. It's done fairly well. So let's go ahead and go on. We just went back to Florida. Let's go ahead and go forward, and we're going to talk about the climatology, or what we've got in the Southeast right now. Go ahead and go to the next slide. There we go. And so when we look at our river conditions, the recent rainfall over Georgia has produced some flooding over the Altamaha Basin. We had a lot of rain in Atlanta and over Athens area, and it takes probably often a week to 2 weeks for it to get through that system. So we'll likely see continued flooding in central Georgia as it moves to the Atlantic coast over the next week. Also in the panhandle of Florida, it saw heavy rain this last week, and then through Alabama. Now, fortunately, through Alabama, we had been a touch dry before all this recent rainfall, so we did see some flooding, especially flash flooding over the Birmingham area and the Huntsville area, but we have quieted down just a little bit. And also, we had some heavy rains in the Carolinas, but again, they had been dry, as you saw from the drought monitor. And so we look like we're in much better shape now, and we continue to stay in flood. It seems like we've been at some part in the Southeast RFC area for the whole year has been in some sort of flood. So we're kind of used to it, but we could use a little bit of dryness over parts of the Southeast. But let's go ahead and go on to our climatology. So this is the flood climatology for the Southeast. And as was mentioned, just a little bit ago by Sandra, we're coming kind of to, we peaked in the middle of September for our hurricane season, and October 15th is kind of where we really start to fall off. That's kind of the end of the peak, although it doesn't keep us from having flooding. But you can see the week 36 to week 41, which is kind of that early September through this week in October, that it does tend to stay active, and our rivers tend to get a lot more flooding due to tropical weather. But then it really does fall off as we get to the end of October and early November. We don't get as many storms, although they do happen, so we have to be watching for that. But climatologically, we do seem to really fall off at that time and have a break in the late October into early December timeframe, where we start to ramp up again for our winter recharge season. So hopefully that can happen. We can get a little bit of break from all of the rainfall as the leaves fall and everything else, and then we can go into that November timeframe and then December and be in good shape going into the recharge season, so that we don't have significant flooding during that time. Have a little bit of a break to go into that. So let's go ahead and go on to our next slide. So as we talk and we look at the October, November, and December 2021, Sandra showed the outlook from the Climate Prediction Center on dryness over part of the Southeast due to the La Niña. But since we're still in hurricane season, and we still have the potential for flooding because of all of our rivers are so high through much of the Southeast, we still consider Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, kind of the northern Florida and Florida panhandle above normal risk for river flooding during this time. And then as we look at Central and South Florida, more typical type flooding, we're at the end of their wet season, so they may still have some wetness in the area and still some possible flooding, but more of a typical type where we're not as wet, but we do still have those chances for it. And then as we get into North Carolina, Virginia, and South Carolina, because they've had recent rainfall, but they're a little bit dry, it's likely they won't be impacted as much, and especially because at this time of year, we don't have as any storms coming out of the Atlantic and hitting that area. They would be more likely to be affected by a storm that came out of the Gulf and came over that area. So more typical type flooding we would expect in the Carolinas and Virginia. And so the overview, Again, above normal stream flows across Mississippi, Alabama, and Georgia, northern Florida, and then we're normal in all the other places. Reservoirs across the southeast are near their targets, and a lot of the reservoirs at this time of year are starting to drop their pools because of the recharge season we have in the winter, so they have more room to hold water to prevent flooding. So they'll be dropping their pools, but they're very near their target pools and are trying to bring those down and get rid of some water so they're prepared for the winter season. But water resources remain adequate across most of the southeast. We don't look to have any real issues, especially widespread issues across the southeast. So it looks like we're in good shape as we enter kind of hopefully a lull in the climatology and a little bit quieter time in the southeast. And with that, I will pass it over to Pam.
Well, good morning, everybody. It is a great time of the year for farmers because everybody's looking forward to their harvest. I will tell you right off that if you hear any banging in the background, it's because the IT guys are right outside my office replacing cabling. I'll try not to let it distract me too much. But I'm here to talk about the agricultural impacts we've seen over the last month or so. So go on to the next slide, please. You've seen some of these already. The recent conditions from the last 30 days, generally the temperatures have been above normal. Precipitation has varied quite a bit. Some areas wetter, some areas drier. And then the soil moisture, of course, in most parts of the southeast has been very, very wet, which has delayed a lot of field applications of chemicals and delayed harvest to some extent, and also slowed the development of crops. It's interesting, if you look at the temperatures, it's the nighttime temperatures have been running above normal. So it's so wet that the humidity is keeping the temperatures from really dropping into the cooler values. The daytime temperatures have not been that high, and a lot of that probably can be attributed to both having so much water around and also more cloudiness from all the rain, which has also slowed crop development, but has kept the daytime temperatures down a little bit. So most of that warming you see is from nighttime temperatures and not from during the day. And so these are the conditions that the farmers are having to deal with. Of course, last week we had a lot of wet conditions with the upper level low that dropped rain over a lot of the southeast except for Florida and the eastern Carolinas. Unfortunately, that's gone. We have high clouds today at Athens, but it's really going to be another pretty nice day. We go on. Some of the impact of the recent conditions on agriculture. When the conditions are good, they're very good. And so, people in these good weather conditions have really been picking up on their harvesting, defoliating cotton, turning over peanuts, and doing other kinds of end of the year activities, doing a third cutting of hay, planting fall and winter grains. But when it's really wet, it's hard to get in the field. And so that's a real problem because farmers get behind and then everything kind of falls back on that. It's also been causing problems with some fall crops like vegetables with fungal diseases, and so they're having to treat for those as well. Right now is a transition season. Farmers are preparing some fields for fall planting, and the wet conditions have been a little bit of an issue there, not too bad. One comment I did see from South Carolina is that the blackberries this year have been really good. They lost their spring crop to frost, and I think the plants really made up for that by putting on extra berries this fall. It's been a good season for them. So they're having a lot of them, although you can see that little insect picture there shows they're also having some problems with insects. And so they have to make sure they get those berries out as quickly as possible before the insects take over. If you look at the harvest statistics, most crops are a little behind the 5-year average because they're still catching up from all the wet conditions this summer. But they're doing a pretty good job of catching up. And so crops generally look good. On Twitter, I see all these great photos of cotton fields that are just ready to get harvested, and peanuts that are turned over, and those are getting ready to be harvested as well. So it's an exciting time of year. I think farmers are especially excited this year because cotton prices are high, and the tropics are quiet, and so they're not likely to see an issue that we had a few years ago with Hurricane Michael blowing all the cotton off the plants a week before harvest. If we go on. Not too early to think about frost. I looked at some of the long-range forecasts. Of course, you always have to take those with a grain of salt, but the long-range forecasts do indicate that frost is starting to be likely to occur, especially at higher inland elevations. By late October, it's right on schedule for the first freeze of 50%. I was just thinking as I was listening to Todd talk here that, with all the moisture that we're having this year, it's going to be hard for temperatures at the surface to drop really low because that water is going to keep things from really drying out. And of course, when you have a lot of clouds, you don't really get the really deep, cold pools either. We see those mostly when you have calm skies and clear skies and drier air, and so that may hold off the frost a little bit this year. It'll be interesting to see how that happens. But we're getting to that time of the year, and so you should be thinking about when is frost likely to hit. And so agroclimate.org does have some tools that show you a county by county statistics for when the first frost is likely. This is a graph that they have for 50%, but they also have maps that show 10% and 90%. If we go on, the rainfall across the region in the next week, Sandra also pointed this out, is quite light. There's quite a few areas that really aren't expected to get any rain at all. The front that is going to come through the area probably on Saturday, at least in Georgia here, probably not going to drop a lot of rain. It may drop some, but it will be scattered and probably not real heavy. And so the football players are happy because they don't think the game will get rained out. And the farmers are happy because it gives them more chance to get back into the fields and make progress on their harvesting. Does mean that when you don't have a lot of rain, there's limited relief for those areas that are dry now, according to the Drought Monitor, Eastern Carolinas, Virginia, and Florida, parts of Florida anyway. And so those areas might have a little bit of trouble getting winter grains established or forage established for winter, just because it has been fairly dry in those areas. Not going to be a problem in most parts of the southeast. And that front will come through. It's going to mostly affect, I think, northwest Alabama during the next week. If we go on, some of the threats to agriculture that are still coming up. We know the tropical season is winding down. There's those two little spots there. Neither of them is really expected to do much of anything. They're probably going to peter out, but even if they were, they probably wouldn't hit the U.S. Tropical season is not over yet. We could still see something. More likely, it would be developing in the Gulf rather than in a wave coming off of Africa, because we're kind of at the end of the African wave season. But it's not too late, and it's the conditions in the Gulf are quite warm, so that's something that we're going to continue to keep an eye on. At least for the next week or so, I think things look pretty good. And so that will give farmers a chance to get a lot of that harvest in. The dry conditions will certainly help that as well, allow them to go out and get a lot of field work done, harvesting done. And so that really will be advantageous to the farmers. The end of the month, it does look like we're more likely to go back to conditions that are slightly wetter. So that's good incentive for farmers to not lollygag around, but keep on going. And I think most of them know that already, to make sure that they get that into secure storage facilities where they can keep the grain or whatever crop they're growing at a good condition. And then, as Sandra pointed out, the La Nina is likely to be playing an increasing role by late fall. I'm interested to see what's happening on Thursday when they put out the new outlook. But all the long-range forecasts are consistent with what we expect from a La Nina, with warmer and drier conditions across a lot of the southeast. It is interesting to note that statistically, the summer after a La Nina, especially if it drops pretty quickly into an El Nino state, is one of the likely predictors for drought in the southeast. So that'll be looking really far ahead. That'll be something to be interesting to watch for next year. Way too early to make a call on that, but just something to keep in mind. If we go on, here's my summary of the ag impacts and outlooks. The dry weeks have allowed field work and harvest to continue quickly, but the wet conditions have made the soil in some places very muddy, and so some of those places have been slowed down in their harvest a bit. Dry areas in the central and western North Carolina and Virginia, and really even more in the eastern areas now, are there, but they've been reduced somewhat. disease pressure from fungal diseases because of all the humidity, less from insect pests, although I still see plenty of complaints about armyworms and whiteflies and other pests like that. And then the farmers, I think, this is the driest time of year. It's always good for harvest. The farmers will have to time their work because there will be some fronts that will come through, and always, of course, the possibility of a tropical system. But as long as they watch that, I think they should be able to get their work done pretty quickly. And, I think they're looking forward to a really good harvest. So that's all I've got.
Great, thank you so much to our speakers today, to Todd Hamill, to Pam Knox, and of course to Sandra Ring. My name is Meredith Muth. I am a Regional Information Coordinator for the National Integrated Drought Information System, one of the sponsors of this webinar series, along with the National Weather Service and the Southeast Regional Climate Center. If you have any questions or comments, please enter them into the question box in the GoToWebinar control panel. Just a quick reminder before we get to questions that we do have, we will share the recording and summaries in a recap email, hopefully by the end of today. We have the webinar schedule for the rest of the year is next month is rescheduling what we're supposed to have today, which is looking at the climate future at your community level. So looking at projections, etc. And then the second one, we've talked about La Niña quite a bit today. So we will have a guest from the NOAA Climate Prediction Center to specifically talk about the current status of ENSO and La Niña in the Southeast. When the webinar closes, there'll be a quick survey. If you haven't taken it before, please do. If there are certain special topics you'd like to hear more about related to climate and climate impacts in the region, please let us know. And recommendations are always welcome. So with that, we'll go ahead and to the question period. First question is for Pam. When is growing harvest season considered officially over? We were looking into our frost freeze warning program for central Alabama, and we'll base it off the end of the ag season.
Yeah, that's a great question. And the answer is not quite as simple as you might believe, because not all crops are equally sensitive to frost. Generally, I think from a climatology standpoint, we tend to use 32 degrees Fahrenheit as the cutoff. There are some crops that do fine below that. If you have a winter crop like cauliflower or broccoli or something like that, they do okay in cooler temperatures, so they can take a little bit more cold. But in general, when you get to 32 degrees, the cells inside the plant start to freeze, and that pretty much kills them off, unless they're one of these ones that's less sensitive to cold. And so for most people, the growing season is defined as the time period between the last frost in spring, the last 32-degree frost in spring, and the first one of 32 degrees in the fall. And so that's the official definition of the growing season.
Great, thank you, Pam. Actually, that's our only question right now. I'm going to give it just a few more seconds. Do any of our presenters have anything else that they would like to add before we close this webinar today? Okay, then with that, we've set a record for our shortest webinar. I thank you all for joining us. Again, thank you to our presenters, and we look forward to speaking to you next month. Have a wonderful day.